The message arrived at 3 in the morning, ship time. Commander Luke Harris was already awake. Sitting alone in the observation deck of the Starfall, watching the distant stars spin slowly past the reinforced windows, sleep had become difficult lately. Something in the void called to him, feeling he could not name but could not ignore. When his communicator buzzed with the priority alert, he knew before reading it that everything was about to change. The Galactic Coalition had existed for over 4,000 years, uniting 12 spacefaring species under a single banner of cooperation and mutual defense. Humanity had joined barely a century ago, the youngest and least experienced member of this ancient alliance. Most other species treated humans the way adults treat children who have wandered into an important meeting. They were tolerated, sometimes pitied, but never truly respected. Luke had grown used to the condescension. He had spent 20 years in the Earth's Space Navy, rising through the ranks through skill and determination. He had commanded the Starfall for 5 years now, and his crew was the finest he had ever served with. But in the eyes of the Coalition, he was still just a primitive from a primitive world. The message changed everything. A new threat had emerged from the unexplored regions beyond Coalition space. They called it the Void Swarm, a massive horde of biomechanical creatures that moved through space like a plague of locusts. In the past 3 months, the swarm had consumed 2 entire civilizations, races that had never made contact with the Coalition. Billions of lives had been erased as if they had never existed. Now the swarm was heading toward Coalition territory. The High Council had ordered the assembly of the largest military fleet in galactic history. 400 warships from 11 species would gather at the Meridian system to make their stand. Earth was contributing 12 ships. Luke's Starfall was one of them. He called a meeting of his senior officers within the hour. They gathered in the small briefing room, their faces showing various degrees of concern and curiosity. Lieutenant Commander Nina Grant arrived first, as she always did. She was his tactical officer and second in command, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She had saved his life twice in combat situations, and he trusted her judgment more than his own. Chief Engineer Carlos Vega came next, still wiping grease from his hands. Carlos was a genius with machines, able to coax performance from systems that should have failed years ago. He was also Luke's oldest friend. Having served together since their academy days, communications officer Priya Sharma entered quietly. Her tablet already displaying incoming transmissions from Coalition Command. She was young, barely 30, but she had an almost supernatural ability to detect patterns in data that others missed. Finally, weapons specialist Derek Cole took his seat. Derek was a large man with a calm demeanor that hit a fierce warrior's heart. He had grown up on one of Earth's outer colonies, where life was hard and survival was never guaranteed. He understood combat in a way that made him invaluable. Luke explained the situation in simple terms. The swarm was coming. The Coalition was gathering to stop it. They would be part of that effort. Nina studied the tactical data on her screen. 400 ships is impressive, she said. But look at these projections. The swarm numbers in the millions of individual units. Even with concentrated firepower, we're looking at difficult odds. The Coalition has never lost a major engagement, Carlos pointed out. The Valorians alone have won every war they've fought for the past 2,000 years. There's a first time for everything, Derek said quietly. Luke nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. The confidence of the Coalition species was based on millennia of success. But success could breed complacency. Complacency could be fatal. The Starfall made the jump to the Meridian system 3 days later, arriving to find an astonishing sight. Ships of every size and design filled the space around the system's largest planet, a blue gas giant called Meridian Prime, Valorian dreadnoughts. Massive vessels, bristling with weapons, held the center of the formation. Kethmari cruisers, sleek and fast, formed the flanks. Sindari carriers, each capable of launching hundreds of fighter craft, provided support. Dozens of other species contributed, vessels of various capabilities. The 12 human ships gathered at the edge of the formation. Almost an afterthought, Luke attended the command briefing aboard the Valorian flagship. A vessel so large, It had its own internal weather system. Admiral Zethriel of the Valorian hierarchy presided over the gathering, his silver skin gleaming under the artificial lights. He was over 800 years old, a veteran of conflicts that predated human spaceflight by centuries. The plan was straightforward. The fleet would form a defensive line in the Meridian system, using the gravitational fields of the gas giant to anchor their position. When the swarm arrived, concentrated firepower would destroy the creatures before they could reach Coalition space. Luke raised his hand to speak. Admiral Zethriel acknowledged him with barely concealed impatience. "Admiral, I've been studying the available data on the swarm's previous attacks," Luke said. "Their movement patterns suggest a level of coordination that implies central command units within their formations. If we could identify and target these command units, we might be able to disrupt their entire swarm behavior." Zethriel's expression could only be described as dismissive. "The humans offered tactical advice," he said, and several of the other admirals made sounds that might have been laughter. "Commander, your species has been traveling between stars for less than 3 centuries. The Valorian hierarchy has been conducting interstellar warfare since before your ancestors discovered fire. We appreciate your enthusiasm, but perhaps you should focus on following orders rather than giving them." Luke felt heat rise to his face, but he controlled his reaction. He had expected this response. It was the same response humans always received. Nina caught his eye across the room and gave a small shake of her head. "Not worth the fight." "Not yet." The briefing ended with assignments. The human ships would hold a position on the far left flank of the formation, well away from where the main fighting was expected to occur. It was the safest position and also the most meaningless. They were being kept out of the way as Luke returned to the Starfall, stopped at an observation port and watched the swarms approach on the long-range sensors. They appeared as a red cloud on the display, countless individual points merging into a mass that seemed to pulse with hungry purpose. Something about their movement troubled him. He had seen similar patterns before in nature documentaries about Earth's oceans. Schools of fish sometimes moved in similar ways, drawing predators into traps before striking from unexpected angles. The swarm was not just approaching. It was hunting. He tried one more time to contact Admiral Zethriel with his concerns. His message was marked as received, but never answered. That night, Luke called his crew together one final time before the battle. He looked at their faces, these people who had served with him through countless dangers. They trusted him to bring them home safely. "Tomorrow, we fight," he told them. "I don't know exactly what's going to happen out there, but I want you all to know something. Whatever the other species think of us, whatever the Coalition believes about humanity, we are not going to run. We are not going to hide in the back and let others do the hard work. If this fight goes badly, we will be in the middle of it, doing everything we can to protect our people and our allies. That's who we are. That's what humans do." The crew responded with silence, but it was a determined silence. They understood. Luke returned to his quarters and tried to sleep. The feeling of dread had grown stronger, a weight in his chest that would not lift. Tomorrow would bring answers, one way or another. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance. Indifferent to the small creatures preparing to wage war in their light, the battle began at dawn. Though dawn meant nothing in the endless night of space, Luke stood on the bridge of the Starfall, watching the tactical displays fill with red as the swarm entered the Meridian system. The enemy came like a wave, millions of individual creatures moving as one terrible organism. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. The Coalition fleet opened fire with devastating effect, their combined weapons tearing through the leading edge of the swarm. Thousands of creatures died in the first volley alone. Energy beams crossed the void like angry fingers of light. Touching death to everything they reached, cheers filled the communication channels. Valorian commanders congratulated each other on their accuracy. Kethmari captains boasted about their kill counts. Even the normally reserved Sundari allowed themselves expressions of satisfaction. Luke did not cheer. He stood at his station with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the movement patterns of the enemy. Something was wrong. The swarm was not fighting back with full force. They were taking losses without attempting to close the distance or flank the Coalition formation. They were not retreating either. They were absorbing punishment, letting thousands of their number die while the main body held back. "They're baiting us," Luke said quietly. Nina looked up from her tactical station. "Commander, look at their formation. They're not trying to break through our lines. They're not even trying to avoid our fire. They're drawing us out." As if hearing his words, Admiral Zethral's voice came through the fleet channel. "All ships, advance. Press the attack. The enemy is breaking." The coalition fleet surged forward, eager to finish the fight quickly. Massive dreadnoughts pushed past the gas giant's gravitational boundary. Pursuing the apparently retreating swarm deeper into the system, Luke's hands gripped the railing of his command platform. Every instinct he possessed screamed that this was a mistake. He opened a direct channel to the flagship. "Admiral Zethral, this is Commander Harris of the Starfall. Sir, I believe the enemy is executing a flanking maneuver. Request permission to hold position," and denied, came the cold reply. "All ships maintain pursuit. That includes you, Commander." The channel closed before Luke could respond. The trap sprung 20 minutes later. The gas giant. Meridian Prime had seemed empty on all scans, its thick atmosphere hiding nothing but storms and pressure. But the swarm had been preparing for this battle longer than anyone realized. Hidden within the crushing depths of the planet's atmosphere, where no coalition sensor could reach, waited their Hive-Dash ships. They rose from the clouds like nightmares, taking physical form. Each Hive ship was the size of a small moon, their surfaces crawling with hundreds of thousands of smaller creatures. There were 6 of them. They emerged in perfect position to catch the coalition fleet in a crossfire. The slaughter began immediately. The proud Valorian dreadnoughts, which had never known defeat, were the first to die. The flagship carrying Admiral Zethral was hit by concentrated fire from 2 Hive ships simultaneously. Its shields failed in seconds. Its hull cracked open like an egg dropped on stone. 8,000 crew members died before they even understood what was happening. Chaos consumed the fleet. Ships that had been advancing confidently now found themselves surrounded. Their formations broken, their command structure decapitated. The swarm creatures that had seemed to be retreating turned and attacked with savage fury. Luke watched the tactical display. Turned from confident green to desperate red. Ship icons blinked out of existence one by one, then by dozens, then by scores. The screams of dying crews filled every communication channel. "Toward us, Commander." Nina's voice was steady, but her face was pale. Luke made his decision in the space between heartbeats. The human ships were on the far flank, away from the worst of the fighting. They could run. They could make the jump to hyperspace and escape, while the swarm was focused on destroying the larger ships. It was the smart choice. It was probably what the Coalition expected them to do. It was not what Luke was going to do. "All human vessels, this is Commander Harris, assuming tactical command of Earth forces. Form up on the Starfall. We're going in." Responses came quickly, 11 other human captains acknowledging his orders. None of them questioned him. None of them suggested retreat. "Derek, target the nearest Hive ship. Full weapons load. Carlos, give me everything the engines have. We're punching through their line." Starfall's engines roared to full power. The small human fleet dove into the heart of the battle. They passed dying ships of every species. Escape pods tumbled through space, some already being hunted by swarm creatures. Debris fields marked where proud vessels had made their last stand. The scale of destruction was beyond anything Luke had ever witnessed. A Sindari carrier drifted past, its hull torn open, its fighter bays empty and silent. A Kethmari cruiser spun out of control, flames trailing from its shattered engine section. Everywhere Luke looked, he saw death. The Hive ships noticed the human vessels approaching. Smaller swarm creatures peeled away from the main attack to intercept them. Hundreds of the biomechanical horrors descended on the 12 Earth ships. "Weapons free," Luke ordered. "Clear us a path." Derek's fingers danced across his console, coordinating fire between all 12 human vessels. The Starfall's weapons blazed, cutting through swarm creatures with precise economical bursts. Unlike the Coalition ships that favored overwhelming firepower, human weapons were designed for accuracy and efficiency. Every shot found its target, but there were too many enemies. For every creature destroyed, 10 more took its place. The human ships were being swarmed, their shields taking hit after hit. One of the Earth vessels, the Horizon, took a direct strike to its engine section. Luke watched it fall out of formation, its drive systems failing. Captain Martinez, report. The response was broken by static. Commander? Engine's gone. Can't maintain. Going to try to... The Horizon detonated, caught in a crossfire between a dozen swarm attackers. All hands lost. 11 ships now, then 10, then 9. Luke forced himself to keep moving forward. Grief would come later. Rage would come later. Right now, there was only the mission. Find me a weak point in that hive ship's defenses. There has to be a command center, something controlling these things. Nina worked her console with desperate speed. There, port side, near what looks like a neural cluster. If we can hit it with enough concentrated fire... Derek, you heard her. All ships concentrate fire on these coordinates. 9 human ships turned their weapons on a single point. The hive ship's outer layers were thick, resistant to energy weapons, but the humans did not stop firing. They poured everything they had into that one spot. The hive ship screamed. The sound carried through space on some frequency that should not have been possible. A cry of pain and rage that made Luke's bones vibrate. The neural cluster exploded, and suddenly a quarter of the swarm attackers went still, their coordination lost. The other coalition survivors saw what the humans had done. A Kathmari captain came on the communication channel, his voice filled with disbelief. Human vessels, how did you... What did you just do? We fought back, Luke replied. Now follow us. We're getting out of here. Escape would cost more lives. The journey to the hyperspace jump point would be a running battle through endless waves of enemies. But for the first time since the trap was sprung, there was hope. Luke looked at the remnants of the Great Fleet on his tactical display. Of 400 ships, perhaps 50 remained. The swarm had won this battle decisively, but they had not won the war. Not yet. The Starfall's engines burned bright as it led the survivors toward safety, leaving behind a graveyard of broken ships and shattered dreams. The coalition species had been fighting wars among the stars for thousands of years. They had developed codes of conduct, rules of engagement, traditions that governed how civilized beings made war upon each other. There were lines that were not crossed, methods that were not employed, tactics that were considered beneath the dignity of any advanced civilization. Humanity had no such traditions. Humans had been killing each other since before they learned to write. They had fought with rocks and sticks, with swords and arrows, with guns and bombs. With weapons that could crack a planet in half, they had learned every lesson that war could teach, and they had learned them the hard way now. Surrounded by an enemy that outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. The 9 remaining human ships showed the galaxy what it meant to fight like humans. Luke. Harris had studied military history since childhood. He knew about Thermopylae and Stalingrad, about Midway and the Alamo. He knew about guerrilla warfare and total war, about attrition and annihilation. Every tactic that humanity had ever developed, every dirty trick. Every desperate gamble was stored in his mind like ammunition waiting to be used. Carlos, how much antimatter do we have in the backup containment? The chief engineer checked his readings. Enough for maybe 6 emergency warhead conversions. Why? Start converting. Derek, I need you to program the targeting systems for proximity detonation. We're going to make mines out of our escape pods. There was a moment of silence on the bridge. Escape pods were sacred in coalition warfare. Attacking escape pods, even empty ones, was considered a war crime. Using them as weapons was unthinkable, Commander Nina said carefully. The other species won't like this. The other species are dying, Luke replied. I'm trying to keep them alive. Get it done. Within minutes, the human ships were dropping modified escape pods into the swarm's path. The biomechanical creatures ignored them, their programming unable to recognize the harmless-looking objects as threats. When the pods detonated, they tore holes in the swarm's formation, killing hundreds of creatures with each blast. The swarm adapted quickly, learning to avoid the pod-shaped objects. So Luke changed tactics again, all ships, close to point-blank range with the nearest hive ship. "We're going boarding." Lieutenant Maya Santos led the first assault team. She was a Marine officer from the colony on New Madrid, a world where children learn to fight before they learn to read. Her squad of 30 Marines wore powered armor suits and carried weapons, designed to destroy anything biological. The Starfall flew directly toward the hive ship's surface, so close that the larger swarm weapons could not track them. Boarding tubes punched through the organic hull. Maya's team poured into the alien vessel. The inside of a hive ship was a nightmare made real. The walls were not walls, but living tissue, pulsing with unknown fluids. The corridors changed shape as they watched, the ship's biology responding to the invasion. Swarm creatures emerged from every surface, smaller than the ones in space, but no less deadly. Maya's team fought through them with brutal efficiency. They did not advance in formation or follow tactical doctrine. They moved like wolves, spreading out and striking from every angle, never giving the enemy a fixed target. When one of her Marines went down, the others did not stop to help. They kept moving, kept killing. Because stopping meant death for everyone. The communication channel carried the sounds of battle, screams and gunfire, and the wet tearing sounds of close combat. Luke listened with his jaw clenched, knowing that every second his people spent inside that ship was a second closer to death. "Maya, report." "Halfway to the neural cluster, Commander. Lost 6 people. These things fight dirty, and fight dirtier. Whatever it takes." Maya understood. She pulled a device from her belt, something her grandfather had used in the colony wars. It was a sonic disruptor, illegal under 17 different coalition treaties. When she activated it, the living walls of the hive ship convulsed in agony. The swarm creatures clutched at their heads. Their coordination shattered. Her remaining team pushed through the disoriented enemy and reached the neural cluster, a massive brain-like organ suspended in a chamber of blue fluid. Maya planted her charges with practiced hands. Charges set. 30 seconds to detonation. Moving to extraction? They ran. Behind them, the charges exploded, and the hive ship's central intelligence died. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every swarm creature connected to that hive ship stopped moving simultaneously, their bodies going limp as the controlling mind vanished. Maya's team reached the boarding tubes with 12 survivors out of 30. Luke watched them come aboard and felt pride and grief in equal measure. The other human ships had been busy while the boarding action proceeded. Captain Rachel Chen of the Constellation had discovered that swarm creatures were vulnerable to certain electromagnetic frequencies. She modified her ship's communications array into a weapon, broadcasting pulses that caused the creatures' biomechanical systems to malfunction. Captain Daniel Park of the Vigilance had taken a different approach. His ship was badly damaged, its weapons nearly depleted. Instead of retreating, accelerated toward the largest concentration of enemies and triggered his reactor's emergency venting system. The resulting radiation burst sterilized a cubic kilometer of space. The Vigilance was destroyed, but it took thousands of swarm creatures with it. Captain Park's last words were calm and clear. "Tell my wife I love her." For Earth, the surviving coalition ships watched in stunned amazement as the humans tore through the swarm. These primitive, short-lived creatures were fighting with a ferocity and creativity that the elder races had never imagined. A Valorian cruiser. One of the few survivors of that proud fleet moved to support the human vessels. Its captain, a young officer named Kelra, who had lost his entire family on the flagship, opened a channel. "Human vessels, this is the Valorian cruiser Eternal Dawn. We wish to assist. What are your orders?" It was the first time in history that a Valorian had asked a human for orders. Luke did not hesitate. "Fall in behind us. Match our speed and heading. When we fire, you fire at the same target. Don't stop until the target is dead." The Eternal Dawn complied, and soon other surviving ships joined the human formation. A Kethmari cruiser, 3 Sindari fighters, a damaged but functional transport from a species Luke did not recognize. They formed a ragged line behind the human vessels and followed them toward the hyperspace. Jump point those swarmed through everything it had at the escaping fleet. Creatures by the thousands hurled themselves at the ships, dying in waves against their shields. The hive ships maneuvered to cut off their escape, their massive weapons charging for killing shots, but the humans had one more trick. Carlos had been working throughout the battle, modifying the Starfall's hyperspace drive with techniques that violated several laws of physics. Normal ships needed to reach a specific point in space to jump safely. Carlos believed he could make the jump from anywhere. "Commander, the drive is ready." "Probably ready. About 70% sure it won't kill us all." "I'll take those odds." "All ships, prepare for emergency. Jump on my mark." The jump point was still minutes away. The hive ships were closing. There was no way the fleet would reach safety in time. "Carlos, do it." The chief engineer activated his modified drive. For a moment, nothing happened. Then space itself seemed to fold around the surviving ships, wrapping them in light that burned too bright to look at. When the light faded, they were somewhere else. The Meridian system was gone, replaced by the familiar stars of Coalition core space. They had made it. Behind them, the swarm claimed the Meridian system as its own. The battle was lost. But against all odds, 43 ships had survived. 9 of them were human. The fleet emerged from hyperspace near Sentinel Prime, the most heavily fortified world in Coalition space. Defense platforms surrounded the planet like a shell of steel and fire, their weapons ready to destroy any threat that approached. For the first time in hours, Luke Harris allowed himself to breathe. The Starfall was barely holding together. Hull breaches had been sealed with emergency patches. The port engine was running on backup power. 17 crew members were dead, their bodies stored in the cargo bay until they could receive proper burial. Carlos had kept the ship flying through sheer willpower and creative engineering, but even he looked exhausted beyond measure. "Sentinel Prime Control, this is Commander Luke Harris of the Earth vessel Starfall. We are survivors of the Meridian Fleet, requesting emergency docking clearance for all vessels." The response came immediately, the controller's voice carrying shock and confusion. "Starfall, we have 43 ships on our sensors. The Meridian Fleet numbered 400. Please confirm your status." Status confirmed. 400 ships engaged the enemy. 43 survived. The rest were destroyed. Silence stretched across the channel. The controller had no words for a disaster of this magnitude. The survivors limped into dock over the next several hours. Medical teams met each ship, rushing the wounded to hospitals. Engineers began the long process of damage assessment. Officers from Coalition Command gathered statements. From every captain and senior officer who had witnessed the battle, Luke did not rest. He could not rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the horizon exploding. He heard Captain Park's final transmission. He felt the weight of every death pressing down on his shoulders. Nina found him in the Starfall's observation deck, staring out at the stars. She did not speak immediately, just stood beside him and shared the silence. "The Coalition High Council has requested your presence," she finally said. "They want a full report on the battle. I'm sure they do." Luke's voice was flat, drained of emotion. "They want to know how 400 ships became 43. They want someone to blame. Maybe they want to understand how 9 human ships survived when the great powers of the galaxy were destroyed around them." Luke considered this. The numbers were remarkable. Earth had sent 12 ships to the battle. 9 had returned. A survival rate of 75% when the overall fleet survival rate was barely 10%. It was the kind of statistic that demanded explanation. The council chamber on Sentinel Prime was vast, designed to hold representatives from every Coalition species. When Luke entered, he found it nearly empty. The Valorian delegation was reduced to 3 junior officers. The Kethmari had sent only a single representative. The Sindari seats were occupied by a lone counselor who looked like she had not slept in days. Counselor Bermoth of the Sindari called the session to order. She was old, even by the long-lived standards of her species, and her eyes held centuries of wisdom and sorrow. Commander Harris, thank you for coming. The Council has reviewed the preliminary reports from Meridian. Before we proceed with questions, we must acknowledge something. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The Valorian hierarchy has dominated coalition military strategy for 3,000 years. In that time, they have never suffered a defeat of this magnitude. Many of us believed they were invincible. The surviving Valorian officers shifted uncomfortably. We now know that belief was arrogance, Varamoth continued. And arrogance cost us 357 ships and over 1 million lives. Luke said nothing. There was nothing to say. Commander, your species contributed 12 ships to the Meridian fleet. 9 returned. More importantly, those 9 ships were instrumental in allowing the other survivors to escape. We have testimony from captains of 6 different species, stating that human vessels led the breakout, provided covering fire, and developed tactics that proved effective against the swarm. We need to understand how this was possible. Luke stepped forward to the central podium. A holographic display activated, showing a tactical replay of the battle. He began to speak, explaining the decisions he had made and why he had made them. He talked about the movement patterns he had noticed before the battle, the warning signs that something was wrong. He described the tactics his ships had employed, the boarding actions, the improvised weapons, the desperate gambles that had somehow paid off. The counselors listened in silence. Several took notes. A few asked clarifying questions. When Luke finished, Varamoth spoke again. Commander, your tactics violated at least 14 coalition conventions of warfare. You weaponized escape pods. You used sonic disruptors that are banned. Our treaty? Your people engaged in close combat that most species consider barbaric? Yes, Luke agreed. We did, and yet those tactics saved lives. Not just human lives. The lives of Valorians, Kethmari, Sindari, and others. Varamoth leaned forward. Commander Harris, I am going to ask you a question that may seem simple but is perhaps the most important question of this hearing. Why did humanity fight this way when it violated everything the Coalition considers proper conduct in warfare? Luke thought about the question carefully. He thought about Carlos, who had died keeping the Starfall's engines running. He thought about Captain Park, who had turned his ship into a weapon. He thought about Maya Santos, fighting through a living nightmare with nothing but courage and determination. Counselor, humanity has been fighting wars since before we had a word for war. We have killed each other over resources, over beliefs, over pride, over nothing at all. We have committed terrible acts in the name of survival. We are not proud of this history, but we have learned from it. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The Coalition species have been spacefaring for thousands of years. You have developed rules for warfare because you had the luxury of being powerful enough to enforce those rules. Humanity has never had that luxury. We learned that the universe does not care about rules. It does not care about honor or tradition or dignity. It simply is. And in the universe as it is, the only thing that matters is survival. The chamber was utterly silent. At Meridian, survival required us to do things that your species consider unacceptable. We did them anyway, not because we enjoy violence, not because we lack civilization, but because the alternative was extinction. We fight ugly because losing is uglier. We break rules because following rules means death. We do whatever it takes because whatever it takes is the only option we have ever known. Varamoth studied him for a long moment. Commander, are you saying that humanity's greatest strength is its willingness to abandon principle in pursuit of survival? No, Counselor. I am saying that humanity's greatest strength is its refusal to die. Principles are important. Rules are important. But they are worthless if you are not alive to uphold them. First, you survive. Then you worry about everything else. The hearing continued for several more hours. Luke answered every question with honesty and patience. He did not apologize for the tactics his people had used, but neither did he celebrate them. War was ugly. Survival was ugly. But they were both necessary. When the hearing finally ended, Varamoth approached him privately. Her ancient face showed an expression Luke could not read. Commander Harris, I have lived for 900 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I thought I understood warfare. She shook her head slowly. I was wrong. Your species terrifies me. But you also give me hope. Hope for what, counselor? Hope that we might actually survive what is coming. The swarm will attack again. When they do, I believe humanity should lead our response. She placed a thin hand on his arm. Rest now, Commander. The galaxy will need you again soon. Luke returned to the Starfall that night. The ship was quiet, most of the crew either in medical facilities or catching what sleep they could. He walked through the empty corridors, touching the walls that had protected them through the worst battle in Coalition history in the cargo bay. 17 bodies waited for burial. Luke spoke their names aloud, one by one, committing each to memory. They had given everything so that others might live. He would not let them be forgotten. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance. The swarm was out there preparing for its next attack. But humanity was preparing too, and humanity had learned long ago that preparation was the difference between survival and extinction. 6 months had passed since the disaster at Meridian. The galaxy had changed in ways that would have seemed impossible a year ago. The old order, dominated by ancient species with ancient traditions, had been shattered. In its place, something new was being built. Admiral Luke Harris stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Defiance. It was the largest vessel humanity had ever constructed, built in record time using resources from every human colony. But it was not the size of the ship that mattered. It was what it represented. Around the Defiance, 500 warships held formation. 200 of them flew the flag of Earth. The rest came from every species in the Coalition. Their crews trained in the tactics that humans had demonstrated at Meridian. 6 months ago, the Coalition would never have accepted a human as fleet commander. 6 months ago, the other species had barely acknowledged humanity's existence. Now they followed Luke Harris into battle because they understood that following him was their best chance of survival. Nina. Grant served as his executive officer, her sharp mind invaluable in coordinating the massive fleet. Derek Cole had been promoted to command the tactical division, overseeing weapons systems across hundreds of vessels. Maya Santos led the newly formed Interspecies Marine Corps, training warriors from a dozen different species in human combat techniques. Priya Sharma had become something of a legend in her own right. Her ability to detect patterns in swarm behavior had allowed the Coalition to predict and counter several smaller attacks in the months since Meridian. She worked from a specially designed analysis center aboard the Defiance, surrounded by displays that fed her information from across the galaxy. The swarm was coming again. This time, they brought everything. Long-range sensors showed a force that dwarfed the one that had destroyed the Meridian fleet. 12 hive ships instead of 6. Millions of swarm creatures instead of hundreds of thousands. The enemy had learned from their previous battle with humans, adapting their tactics and improving their coordination. But humanity had been adapting too. All ships. This is Admiral Harris. The enemy approaches. They believe this will be their final victory, the battle that breaks the Coalition forever. They are wrong. His voice carried across 500 bridges, translated into dozens of languages, heard by crews of every species in the galaxy. 6 months ago, we showed them that we could survive. Today, we show them that we can win. Every ship in this fleet has trained in the tactics that brought us through Meridian. Every captain knows their role. Every crew member understands what is at stake. The swarm formation grew larger on the tactical displays. A tide of death approaching with terrible inevitability. The enemy expects us to fight with honor, to maintain our formations, to follow the old rules. We will not give them what they expect. We will fight like humans. We will be unpredictable. We will be relentless. We will be victorious. He paused, letting the words sink in. For every world we have lost, for every life we will never recover, for every species that depends on us today, forward. The battle that followed would be remembered for centuries. The Coalition fleet did not wait for the swarm to reach them. They advanced in a formation that seemed chaotic, but was actually carefully designed to confuse enemy targeting systems. Ships moved in patterns that no swarm intelligence could predict, spreading and concentrating in ways that defied traditional military logic. When the fleets met, the humans struck first. Teams of marine vessels, small and fast, dove into the swarm formation and attached themselves to hive ships. Boarding parties flooded through organic corridors, fighting their way toward neural clusters with weapons that had been specifically designed to exploit swarm weaknesses. Maya Santos led the assault on the largest hive ship, personally. Her team included warriors from 6 different species, each trained to fight in the human style. A Valorian officer who had lost his family at Meridian fought beside her. A Kethmari soldier who had sworn a blood oath against the swarm covered her flank. A Sindari technician kept their equipment functioning through conditions that would have killed an unprotected being. They reached the neural cluster in 40 minutes, losing only 8 of their 30-person team. When the charges detonated, an entire section of the swarm fleet went dark. Outside, the main battle raged with terrible intensity. Coalition ships used the improvised tactics that humans had developed, turning escape pods into mines, broadcasting electromagnetic pulses, ramming damaged vessels into enemy formations. The swarm adapted to each tactic, but humans adapted faster. Admiral Harris commanded from the center of the formation, his orders coordinating thousands of individual actions into a coherent strategy. He saw patterns that others missed, weaknesses that could be exploited, opportunities that lasted only seconds before disappearing. Constellation, shift fire to Sector 7. There's a gap in their coordination. Vigilance, too. Cover the Eternal Dawn's flank. Priya, I need those movement predictions now. The battle lasted 9 days. 9 days of constant fighting, of ships dying, of crews pushing themselves beyond any reasonable limit. The Coalition lost 112 vessels. It's a terrible cost, but far less than anyone had expected. The swarm lost everything. On the 9th day, the last hive ship died. Its neural cluster, the final controlling intelligence of the entire swarm, was destroyed by a joint human-Valorian boarding team. Without central coordination, the remaining swarm creatures became mindless, easy targets for the exhausted Coalition forces. When the last creature fell silent, a cheer rose across the fleet that seemed to echo through space itself. The war was over. The swarm was broken. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Coalition convened for the most important session in its 4,000-year history. Every member species sent representatives. The chamber was full for the first time since the founding era. Counselor Veramoth presided, her ancient face showing exhaustion, but also something like joy. We have gathered today to recognize those who saved us all. The Void Swarm represented the greatest threat our coalition has ever faced. For a time, we believed we might not survive. We were wrong, and we were wrong because of humanity. She gestured, and a holographic image of Earth appeared in the center of the chamber. When our ancient species dismissed humans as children, they fought alongside us anyway. When our proud warriors fell, humans led us to safety. When our traditional tactics failed, humans showed us a better way. They asked for nothing in return, except the chance to help. Representatives of every species listened in respectful silence.
Yes.
Coalition has a designation reserved for the most sacred places in our civilization. It is called Protected Status. Only the homeworlds of the 12 founding species have ever received this honor. Today, by unanimous vote of the High Council, we extend protected status to Earth and all human territories. A murmur ran through the chamber. This was unprecedented. No junior member species had ever received such recognition. Let it be recorded in our histories that when darkness came, humanity was our light. When fear consumed us, humanity showed us courage. When the old ways failed, humanity forged new paths. Earth protected us. Now and forever, we protect Earth. Admiral Luke Harris watched the ceremony from a balcony above the main chamber. Beside him stood the survivors of his original crew, the people who had been with him since Meridian. Nina, Derek, Priya, Maya. And the others who had risked everything and somehow lived to see this day, Carlos was not among them. Neither were the 17 crew members whose names Luke still spoke aloud every night before sleep. Their sacrifice had made this moment possible. Priya moved closer to him. Do you think it's really over? The swarm, I mean? Are they truly gone? Luke considered the question. He thought about all the threats humanity had faced throughout its long history. The wars and plagues and disasters that had nearly destroyed them. Each time, they had survived. Each time, they had emerged stronger. The swarm is finished, he said, but there will be other threats. There always are. The universe is vast and dangerous, and peace never lasts forever. Will we be ready? He looked at the gathering below, at representatives of species that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant. They had learned better. The galaxy had learned what humans could do when pushed to the edge. We'll adapt, Luke said. We'll improvise. We'll do whatever it takes. That's what humans do. That's what we've always done. He thought about Carlos, about all the friends he had lost, about the price of survival. It was a heavy burden, but it was one humanity had carried before. We survived because we refused to give up, he continued. We won because we refused to accept defeat. And whatever comes next, whatever new enemy emerges from the void, we'll face it the same way, together. Below, the ceremony continued. Species that had been spacefaring for millennia pledged their protection to a world that had only known the stars for a few centuries. It was the beginning of a new era, one where humanity would stand not as the youngest and least of the coalition, but as its defenders. Luke Harris had never wanted to be a hero. He had only wanted to bring his crew home safely. But sometimes the universe does not care what we want. Sometimes it demands more than we believe we can give. And sometimes, when we give everything we have, it is enough. The stars shone bright over Sentinel Prime, witnesses to the birth of a new age. The galaxy had been saved. Earth was protected, and somewhere out there, in the infinite darkness between worlds, the next challenge was already waiting. But when it came, humanity would be ready. They always were.